So most of the articles I wrote were for the people who had spent the $500 to $1,000 and they needed to address all these issues. Some of them are safety issues and they need to be done whether you're going to race or not. But others are race specific.
If you mind just touching on the kind of maybe the three or four key safety issues, that somebody should do before they put that thing in the water.
Well, the first two are related to the rig, and one is the chain plates that you mentioned earlier, because if the chain plates pull out while you're sailing and the rig comes down, you're going to have a bad day. And a lot of people who are buying these boats inexpensively, they don't have a lot of experience, and so they can get into serious problems. If you're out in a body of water where rescue is not going to be at hand at all times and you lose your rig, what do you do at that point? If you've got no experience, you don't know what to do. And if you've got kids with you or a wife with you, then that may be the end of your sailing days. So the rig is the soundness of the rig is the most important thing. The other thing related to this, the soundness of the rig, is the centerboard trunk, where the main sheet is attached to the top of the centerboard trunk. Prior to 1979, the structural strength was minimal in that attachment. And if you get out in any kind of wind, especially as the fasteners start aging a bit, the top of the centerboard trunk just pulls right off. And then you can't sail. Because you've lost your attachment point for your mainsail. You could sail with just a jib, but you're basically just trying to get back to harbor at that point in time. What happened was there was a Champion of Champions regatta. That's a U.S. sailing annual regatta, and each competitor has had to win a national championship the previous year. So it's just the top sailors, and they typically limit the race to 20 classes. So each class applies for the regatta each year, and typically about 20 are accepted, and the others are just told try again next year. And I think it was 77, but it might have been 76.
77.
The Buccaneers was the chosen boat, and it was in Chesapeake Bay, and there was a microburst that came through during one of the storms and during one of the races, and the fleet was decimated. Tremendous amount of damage to the boats. A lot of boats were capsized, almost every boat capsized, and they couldn't be righted because they had flooded, because there was no watertight integrity between the cockpit and the deck. So Chrysler got a real black eye on this, and they spent a while redesigning both the Buccaneers and the Mutineers to try to put some watertight integrity between the hull and the deck joint, and the opening at the front of the cockpit. And they were successful in doing so. They didn't solve all the problems, but they solved the worst of the safety factors. And what they did with respect to the centerboard trunk is they put an aluminum bridge within the back of the centerboard trunk, right below where the Mainsheet block is attached. And that aluminum bridge, you can't see it because it's buried within the centerboard trunk. But if you take the top of the trunk off, you can see it. And it's riveted with pop rivets to the bottom portion of the centerboard trunk, which is an integral part of the hull. And that more or less solved the problem. But all the pre-79 boats didn't have that. So if you've got I don't know, I think Buccaneer started somewhere around 1969. So if you've got a 69 to a 79 Buccaneer, you've got that problem unless someone has fixed it. The other key safety feature safety issue is the design of the spider web rudder head,
Mm.
which is a cast aluminum, and it's quite light. It's nice to have light rudders, rudder structures, because you don't want to have weight in the ends of the boat. But they're built a bit too light, and they fail. It's just a question of when are they going to fail, and they typically fail in such a manner that you lose your rudder in terms of its use, and then how do you get back in? If you're out on a lake with motorboats around, fine, no problem. But if you're off day sailing by yourself on a body of water without help around, then you've got a problem. So the problem with addressing that issue is it's not an easy fix. So what typically happens is people just use the rudder head until it breaks, and then they address the problem. But it can break at the worst possible time, and if you're out with the wife and all, it can be a problem. So as you probably know, I have an article from the Yahoo groups on how to build a rudder head, and the reason I built it was because I was out in Cape Cod Bay, and the spider rudder head decided to come apart, fail in a catastrophic fashion. Now, fortunately, I had a 2-horsepower outboard on the boat, so I could just drop the sails and motor back in. But it would have been a real problem if I hadn't had that motor, because if you're out in Cape Cod Bay in the summer, not the weekends. The weekend the motorboats are out, but in the weekdays, there's nobody out there. I was a couple miles offshore, and it would have been a real challenge trying to get back to shore without a rudder. Anyhow, there's a couple $100 worth of materials to make a rudder head, and it's probably 8 to 10 hours worth of work. So it's not a huge effort. It's something you could do on a weekend. But most people end up using the existing rudder head until it breaks.
I know there's a document I floated out there about reinforcing the spider head rudder head. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yep. Yeah.
How viable is that as a?
I think it's helpful. But the rudder head fails in a number of different ways. One of the ways it fails, and the one that was addressed I think in the article you're talking about, was where the rudder head cheeks spread apart.
Yeah.
Or maybe even some of the members crack. And the proposed modification that you're referring to will help in that case.
Okay.
But where my rudder head failed, and where a lot of others failed, is the pintle broke off. And the way that happened is it's a cast aluminum rudder head, but the pintles are stainless steel, and they're pressed into a hole in the cast aluminum. The problem is that they come loose and drop out. And that's exactly what happened with mine. So instead of having the 2 pintles, one of them dropped out, so now I had one. So I went to turn the rudder, and the force on the remaining pintle was tremendous. And it just snapped the aluminum casting. And that's another common failure point.
Yeah, how I got into Buccaneers was a gentleman in our area who had a Buccaneer, and he had issue, but I guess whenever it happened with his, he didn't do any further damage. And so he had, I guess, drilled out the steel pintles, and then just had a long rod that he used for the pintle for both of them. And I know he sailed it that way for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a good solution.
Okay.
That's a good solution. And in fact, if someone was buying an old Buck and they had the aluminum rudder head, I would probably recommend they do exactly that. Take out, even though the pintles look to be perfect, take them out, because you're putting in a solution to a future problem.
All righty. Well, I appreciate it, and I will be in touch and, probably impose upon you at least one more time if I can.
My pleasure. Don't hesitate to get in touch. We can do this again in the future.
Sounds great. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure, Lou.
All righty. Take care.
All right, take care.